Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kids of all ages, I'd like to welcome you to today's session of Speaker's Corner. My name is Gabor Zinner. I'm a local lawyer. I'm the founder of Speaker's Corner. And I'm also the self-proclaimed Grand Mufti of Tompkin Park. Is there anyone here who does not know what a Grand Mufti is? I will explain. The gentlemen and the kids. Okay. So, Muftis are Muslim scholars who interpret and expound Islamic law. And the foremost amongst them in each country is called the Grand Mufti. And because there's about 18 of them around the planet, and because no one ever invited me to join the club, I decided to self-proclaim myself as a Grand Mufti of Tompkin Park. And as I previously acknowledged, it is true that I know nothing about Islamic law, but that has not ever stopped anyone before. So there you go. A couple of acknowledgements before we get going. We're going to have an interesting debate today. It is cerebral, and maybe that's what partially explains the smallness of the crowd. But do know that we appreciate your presence. A couple of acknowledgements. Gentleman over there, Jim Little, I'd like to recognize him. He stepped up toward the end of one of the preceding debates and stepped forward and proposed this topic and arranged the speakers. And I owe him a debt of gratitude, and we thank you, Jim, and want to acknowledge you. Thank you very much. And by a strange quirk of fate and coincidence, we have with us today the lady that designed that logo. She normally lives in Halifax, and by, again, a quirk of cosmic coincidence and genetic coincidence, she happens to be my daughter, Jody Zinner, over there. Jody, great job. So, thank you for coming up. You, sir, are here for the first time, and the kids are here for the first time, and I haven't seen you before. Is this your first time too? You've been here before? Okay. So in any event, just in brief, basically this is an opportunity for Calgarians to engage in discussion and debate, and it is a fresh air experience. And we try to emulate the mission statement of the CBC, which is to inform, enlighten, and entertain. And we have all kinds of topics ranging from deeply political. We've actually had two leaders of two political parties debate here on the Keystone Pipeline. We've had this year a debate on whether or not the Gay-Straight Alliance legislation should be revoked. There were 300 people here, and astonishingly, we could just never ever anticipate what will attract public attention and what won't. For example, we had a debate on whether or not the ouster of Mohamed Morsi would advance or hinder democratic development in Egypt. The place was packed, and there was a bank of 8 TV cameras watching it. But for this particular debate, you are the privileged few. Okay, so the topic for today is be it resolved that there's no such thing as free will. It's philosophical. Now, before I invite Dr. Bailey to introduce the speakers, I just want to make it clear that for the person speaking in favor of the proposition, which is Randy, we're not going to allow any cheap stunts. And what does that mean? I'm going to put this into context. Perhaps the most famous debating goes down between the Oxford and Cambridge debating unions. And there was a classical debate, at least 50 years ago. And to give you the context, China, as we know it now, was formerly known as mainland China. And before that, it was known as Red China. And Red China did not have a seat in the UN. And because, I guess, there was global opposition to the communist regime being accorded a seat in the UN. And so a topic of perennial debate was whether or not Red China should be allowed into the UN. Now you have to understand that there's standard protocol for any and every debate, and it's always the person or the team that kicks off the topic that gets to define the frame of reference. Okay? So I don't know if it was Oxford or Cambridge, but they got up and they started the debate with a simple question. Well, why shouldn't red China be allowed into the UN? They allow blue China, red China, green China, all kinds of China. Why not red China? And so they framed the debate in such a fashion that the opponent was totally caught off guard. Now, why do I say that this stunt is not available to this particular debater? It's because just prior to the event, we got a comment from one of the members at Meetup, and he said, there is no such thing as a free will. I visited my lawyer recently and I had to pay $700 for my will. So there's clearly no such thing as a free will. That's not going to fly, sir. Okay? So having said that, I'd like to invite Dr. Bailey to introduce our speakers, and I'm looking forward to a great debate.
Thank you for being here today, everybody. Our first speaker, who is for the resolution, in other words, he does not believe in free will, is Dr. Randy Tyson, who received his PhD in '96 from the University of Manitoba using an MRI to study the effects of stroke on brain metabolism. From there, he moved to Calgary and continued his research and became a Research Council Officer for the National Research Council of Canada from 2004 to 2012. He is currently with the Alberta Health Services, where he is advancing cancer treatment therapies. In his spare time, he avidly pursues his photographic interests and his 6 cats, and hosts a local podcast, which some know, and it is called The Legion of Reason. I say that all the time. Sorry, folks.
Well, thank you. I'm here to totally depress everybody here by convincing them that they have no free will and are in fact simply information processing meat machines. Now, I really don't have any interest in any other evidence except what we can glean from cognitive sciences or anything associated with neuroscience. Up till now, or at least in the last 20 years, we've seen that a whole new era of scientific inquiry into the mind, and it's quite clear that the mind is what the brain does, as Steven Pinker likes to say. Now, the biggest objection to free will, or to my objection that there is free will, is that we all feel that there is free will. I mean, everybody feels that. I'm not excluding myself at all. I'm here to tell you that that introspective viewpoint is completely wrong. And I'll give you an example of why introspection is a very poor methodology for gaining knowledge about what the mind is doing. And that is, there's a certain population who have had their primary visual cortex, which processes your visual information that is gleaned from your eyes, destroyed either through accident, traumatic brain injury, or through surgical intervention. And these unfortunate people, many of them, they volunteer to actually do experiments by neuroscientists. It sounds a little creepy, but it's incredibly interesting. These people are totally blind. Now, their eyes are working. Their eyes are actually sending signals through the optic nerve into the brain, but the part of the brain which processes those signals is completely destroyed. Or is it? Well, these people can't see a thing. But you place a bunch of objects in front of them, one of which is red, say, and tell them to point to the red object. They'll kind of have they'll be kind of weirded out by the question because, of course, they can't see. But invariably, they can pick out the red object. Yet they can't see it. Now, ask these people afterwards whether they were actually knowingly picking out the object? The answer is no, I was just guessing. Now, statistically, that's impossible. They weren't guessing at all. But the part of the brain which is getting informed, the consciousness is not getting informed of the actual decision which is going on in the background of where to point to that red object. So introspection is a very, very poor way. In fact, these people, by the way, will swear up and down that they have no knowledge of where that object is, even though they can point it out. You throw a ball at them, they'll duck. They can't see it. So introspection is a very poor way of actually gaining information about how the mind works. I do want to step back a little for a moment and just talk about a couple of things about free will. Now, there's a couple of broad categories of free will. There's 3 of them. One is the libertarian contra-causal free will, which means you can make decisions independent of the environment, the sensory input, etc. There's also a determinist position, which is mine, where you are completely dependent upon external factors, your state of mind, your genetics, your epigenetics, and everything is determined when you consider all factors. There's also a third one, which is a compatibilist position that I must admit I never fully understood, even though I called myself a compatibilist until a couple of years ago. That there is free will that is actually compatible with determinist position. Some people actually have that position. That's fine. A lot of this is going to depend on how we define free will in the end. Now, I'm going to tell you something about myself that is what convinced me that determinism was the correct, or hard determinism was the correct position, and that is, it's a philosophical argument, though it is grounded in reality, and it's the only philosophical argument I'm really interested in listening to. If I accept the premise that the mind is what the brain does, the brain is a physical object, obviously, and the laws of physics and chemistry are inviolable. You cannot violate them. I know that they're statistically based, but for any, there's people that, quantum mechanics says that you could go through a wall and emerge on the other side without smashing it down. The problem is that the probability of that is once per many, many lifetimes of the universe it's going to happen. So when we talk about probabilities, we're talking about essentially nothing. So therefore the brain is fully determined. It's a physical object. It's subject to the laws of physics and chemistry. There's another argument that I really take hold of later on. By the way, when I heard that argument, I was reading a book. It was by Alex Rosenberg. And as soon as I read that, at that point I was compatibilist. And I read the argument, and I realized, crap, I'm a determinist now. Nothing changed for my life after that. For most people, it won't. So the realization that you do not have free will doesn't affect your life in any way. At least not mine. I'm still determined. I'm determined to say that, right? Okay. So there's another argument. It's called the two-lever argument. And it's a very similar one. The previous state of the universe, in other words, how the universe was configured at the moment prior to making a decision, that's the first lever. The second lever, the laws that govern the universe is the second lever. The physical rules that determine how the universe transitions from one state to another, namely from the previous state to the next state. So in other words, it's basically past versus future. So you've got these two levers, and you have to be able to control either one of those levers. I don't think you can control either one. It's not possible. Now, some people try to save free will using quantum mechanics, throw that out. I think both of us are going to agree on this, that quantum mechanics does not save free will, because even if quantum indeterminacy was something that happened in a macroscopic object, it really isn't will. It would be just random. And randomness isn't free will. Now, let's get back to the illusion of free will that I was talking about, and that introspection is not something we should be looking to. We should be looking to objective means towards understanding how the mind works. Now, one of the problems of that is, of course, that our language is suffused with free will. I mean, I chose this, I did that, I. There is no I.
We're going to move to the sun's house.
The sheer number of choices that we have buttresses the illusion of free will. And the thing is, I do believe in practical free will. But practical free will is really mundane. All it says is that you have choice X, choice B, choice X, choice Y, choice Z. You also have choice not X, Y, Z. In other words, to do nothing. That covers all the bases. You have to have done one of those things. So this is part of what buttresses our illusion of free will. You had a choice, you made a choice, but you had no choice to make the choice because everything was a choice. So it gives us this illusion that we have this thing. Your mind, your conscious mind is being informed by the unconscious. And that unconscious is going to be determined by external factors, your genetics, your frame of mind at that time. Now, priming, by the way, is a very important factor in your choices, making decisions. It's just kind of your state of mind. If somebody tells you, puts you in a bad mood, it's going to affect your decision-making process after that. Everybody knows that. I mean, just watch road rage. Let's go on here. So the sheer number of choices that you have doesn't really support the idea that you actually have free will. And the experience of free will, which is what I've just been talking about, that you have all these choices, but you had to make one of these choices anyway, is not the same as actually having free will. It's a very different thing. That it's not the only illusion that we have. The illusion of consciousness, that's another illusion. The illusion of the arrow of time, that's the really freakiest one, because we always think time is moving forward. The problem is there is nothing in the laws of physics that tell you that you can't move backwards. There's nothing. But it's useful. It's useful from an evolutionary standpoint because it helps us understand the universe around us. It wouldn't be intelligible if the arrow of time was continually going backwards and forwards. It would be very confusing, obviously. But this illusion is incredibly strong. And even if you take my position, you accept my position that there is no free will, you have to live as if there was. You can't lose it. It's ingrained in us, probably because it's a consequence of agency detection and divining intent. I mean, it's very different from a rock falling off a cliff because of erosion and lands at your feet, and somebody throwing a rock at you trying to kill you is two very different situations, and it's kind of useful if you understand which is which. So I'm going to tell you something about why we believe that the mind is what the brain does, and I'm going to give you two examples, two real-world examples. One is the case of Phineas Gage, who is the archetype of brain-injured patients, and we've seen many thousands of people since then, unfortunately. In 1848, Phineas Gage was a railroad foreman. He was working with a crew. He was tamping in the explosives into a bored hole in a rock, and something went horribly wrong. The charge exploded prematurely. The tamping rod he was using came up from behind his left eye, up through the top of his head, and was found 80 feet away. Well, it was an explosive charge, right? So basically, he got shot. Now, after a few minutes, he suffered from, convulsions for a few moments, and then actually wanted to go back to work. Of course, everybody else said no. So it was the pre-accident. Phineas Gage was a very, very congenial man. He was a pleasure to work with. He was one of the most liked people in the railroad industry in that area that he worked in. And what happened to him afterwards, and it takes time quite often for brain injury to develop. Here's a quote from a physician that describes his case, and I'll quote here. The equilibrium or balance, so to speak, between his intellectual faculties and animal propensities seems to have been destroyed. He is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom, manifesting but little difference for his fellows, impatient or restraint or advice when it conflicts with his desires, at times pertinaciously obstinate, yet capricious and vacillating, devising many plans of future operations which are no sooner arranged than they are abandoned in turn for others appearing more feasible. It goes on. I'm just going to tell you that he wasn't Phineas Gage anymore. He was somebody else. Now, why is that? If there is free will, you are your brain. And your brain is a product of your genetics, the epigenetics, your experience, your state of mind, your interaction with the environment. It's many, many things. And too many to actually do a practical calculation. Yet your brain actually does this. That's the amazing thing. It takes all of this in and actually comes into making decisions. But your brain is actually informing the consciousness, not the other way around. There was a Virginia school teacher in 2002, a 40-year-old man. His wife discovered that he was making sexual advances towards children. And so she evicted them legally from their home. He was found guilty of child molestation. He was medicated for pedophilia and given the choice of either taking a 12-step Sexaholics Anonymous program or go to prison. He tried the Sexaholics Anonymous. Problem was he was booted from that program. And so the night before he was to begin his prison sentence, he started suffering from headaches. He was admitted to hospital, given an MRI, and they found a egg-sized astrocytoma in his brain. And the moment they removed it, all his sexual, I guess you could call it, perversions disappeared. Now, you might say, well, that's abnormal brain, that's injured, etc. But the problem is, I think it underscores that your normal brain is just as affected. It's just that we all have similar brains normally. And just because that something abnormal happens doesn't mean that the normal brain is somehow magically invested with free will. Now, back in the 70s, a man named Liebet was interested in studying what's called the readiness potential that was discovered in the 1960s. Now, the readiness potential is this buildup of neuronal activity prior to actually making motions. So he set up an experiment where he hooked people up to an electroencephalograph, an EEG, whereby they would be asked to lift either the left wrist or the right wrist and actually watch a clock and say, when was it that you decided to make that motion? Well, much to Liebet's surprise, the brain activity in the premotor cortex for that side controlling the wrist that was being lifted happened a lot sooner than when people thought that they had made the decision. And does that close the door on free will? No. He also noticed that there was a veto power that could be used, but it's not something that also can't be explained with determinism. And it is a problem for free will altogether. So your conscious brain was being informed prior to the actual decision-making process. So you didn't really decide. In fact, that experiment has been repeated numerous times. In 2008, a group headed by Soon, they actually found that you could predict reliably which wrist was going to move up to 10 seconds before they were aware the decision was being made. It's a huge problem for free will. It's not a death sentence for it, but it's getting there. It's getting there. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the consequences of not having free will before I finish this, because it is one of the most important factors where people aren't accepting that there's no free will. What are the consequences? Oh, you get people that say, well, there's no moral responsibility. I find that morally reprehensible, actually. Being a determinist, how can I do that? Our ability to think forward and understand the potential consequences of what we are doing now should be a factor in our decision-making process at the time of the decisions being made. And that's where I think moral culpability remains, even if there is no free will. It also admits that there will be exceptions, such as the Virginia school teacher. He obviously did not have a normal brain. Now when we're talking about moral culpability, we're talking about normal brains, and I'm going to put that scare quotes because We're not even sure what a normal brain is, but in other words, there's nothing exceptionally abnormal about it. But we admit, our legal system even admits that sometimes there is no free will by allowing for the fact that people cannot make those decisions. The Virginia school teacher, when he went into hospital, or he was not just afraid for himself in terms of his brain, he was actually afraid he was going to rape his landlady. So he had these desires that he could not control. What does that mean for society? So for society, there are huge implications in terms of our legal system. There are implications in terms of treatment of people for various mental disorders. But for you and me, who are hopefully normal, not going to be so much. You're going to continue on the way you lived up to this point, just as much as you did before you understood that there was no free will. So in closing, I'm hoping that you understand that free will or the lack of free will is not a scary proposition. It is not something to be feared. And in fact, if it's true, understanding that actually allows us to move forward in society and create a better society. So I think that's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now our second speaker, who is opposed to the resolution but believes in free will, is it Jared Craig, who obtained his Juris Doctor from the University of Saskatchewan. He articled under the Chief Justice of Saskatchewan Court of Appeal and has practiced law in Canada. He is currently a PhD student at the University of Calgary in the Department of Philosophy. His general areas of research are criminal law, neuroscience, neuroethics, and free will. His specific focus is on criminal psychopathy, novel brain imaging technologies, and the administration of interventions in the context of criminal proceedings. As part of his research, Jared also explores contemporary advancements in neuroscience released to the correlates to how the neuroscience relates to the neurocorrelates to conscious decision making. He has considered the implications of these advancements for traditional views about free will and criminal responsibility. Jared also has written and presented at legal and academic conferences in the area of human rights, constitutional law, criminal evidence, neuroscience, and neuropathetics. And I'm sorry for my tongue-twisted speech today. Jared.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Thanks for coming out. I'd like to thank Dr. Bailey. And everyone can hear me? Okay. No, it's good. It's good. I'd like to thank Dr. Bailey and Gabber for arranging the Speaker's Corner. I believe that it provides an important forum for us to get out and discuss important issues. And I'd also like to thank everyone that came to discuss these things today. At the outset, I'd just like to say I have a lot of respect for Dr. Tyson and his work. We had an excellent chance to visit before the presentation, and surprisingly, we share a lot of the similar views. I listened to his podcast, The Legion of Reason, and I think his message is really important. As members of society, as responsible members of society, we should be asking hard questions, thinking critically, and not settling for easy answers. Again, greatest of respect, I'm pleased that we're able to debate today. But unfortunately, and again with great respect, I believe that's exactly what we've been offered today, an easy question, an easy answer to a very, very hard question. Now, I believe that we do have free will. I would submit to you today that we do. And my central concern today, my goal isn't to convince you. If you don't believe we have free will, I'm not going to convince you today. What I am going to show you is that science has not proven that we don't. And I take great exception to scientists and popular media that come out and say, well, we found free will now, we know what it is, and we can show you definitively that we don't have it, because it's patently false, it's simply not true. So let's take stock here. How many people here today believe that we have free will? Show of hands. Okay. All right, how many people here believe we don't have free will? Okay. Great. All right. So out of the people that believe we don't have free will, I would suspect that we would agree along the lines with Dr. Tyson that just doesn't seem to fit in with how we understand the universe. We used to believe that the earth was the center of the universe and the sun revolved around the earth. It's just one of these ideas that eventually, as we learn more about how the brain works, how the universe works, we're just going to say there's no such thing as free will. Is that pretty much the basis for people believing that we don't? Along those lines? Okay, how many people here believe we do have free will? Let's see the hands again. Okay. So among these people, I'd imagine there's some that would say that we have free will, and it might be based on theological grounds, some sort of higher power, divine providence, or some higher purpose to the universe. Anyone fall in that camp, that it's just one of the powers we have as sentient beings to make meaning out of our existence? Anybody? Anyone self-identify? How many people here believe we have free will because we feel like we have free will? We feel like we make conscious decisions and that should just be enough. Okay. Now, it may seem like a naive view. I do think there is something to that, to the conscious experience, introspection. I would propose a third position today. You don't need to ascribe to some mystical notion of an immortal soul or some ghost in the machine to believe we have free will. You just need not to uncritically accept the scientific studies, to accept that there may be things about the universe that we don't understand. And I'm going to present an argument today that, in fact, the door is wide open for free will. And more importantly, I want you to come away from here today, if I haven't convinced you, I want to convince you that free will matters. It matters that we have free will. Now, Dr. Tyson said, if we don't have free will, it's not a bad thing. It is. It's a big deal, and I want to make sure that I make that clear today, just how important it is. So, 3 points today. First one, I'm going to look at the science. I'm going to show you why science hasn't proven that we don't have free will. Second, I'm going to talk a little bit about what free will is and say a lot of these claims stemming from the scientific studies are based on an extremely and almost dangerously oversimplified view about exactly what free will is and what it means to be free. Finally, as I say, I'm going to show you why free will matters and why, if we don't have free will, so much of what we believe and so much of what defines our human experience goes out the window. So first, let's go to the science. Again, I'm going to get up on my soapbox here because I take great exception. If nothing else today, if I can convince to show you that the science that you're getting fed in mainstream media and is just a bunch of, excuse my language, is a bunch of crap, then I'll be happy with that. So we've looked at, he mentioned a few brain damage cases. Let's start with the Libet experiment and the Soon study. Now, the Libet experiment, Benjamin Libet did identify preceding brain activity. I won't get into too many of the technical details. And Dr. Tyson, I believe, said well in advance of the conscious decision. Okay, well in advance. We're talking point. I think it was mentioned. Yeah. Okay. Well, Libet 350 milliseconds. That's 1/3 of a second. Those studies have been completely dismantled in the literature. They're based on self-reports by subjects. Do they prove that we don't have free will? Not even close. Let's come to the Soon study now. Again, greatest respect to Dr. Tyson. My main axe that I want to grind today is against people. You see a study coming out every single day. Oh, we found the area of the brain for love. We found the area of the brain for guilt, for neuromarketing to find out what people are going to buy. It's just not true. There's so many things about the brain, even very basic things that we don't know. And in the Soon study, all sorts of problems. The central problem for me is the reliability of the results. Now, I think Dr. Tyson said that based on the Soon study, they were able to accurately predict up to, how long? Okay, all right. Now I am familiar with the Soon study. What do we think that accurately would be? Now Shaquille O'Neal, when he was playing, does anyone know what he shot for free throws? 60%? 50%? Would we say that Shaquille O'Neal was an accurate free throw shooter? Anybody think that? Okay, I will tell you what the findings were in the Soon study. 60%. They were able to predict which button a person would press, either button A or button B, with 60% accuracy. That's 10% greater than chance. Can we really communicate to the public responsibly, like the New York Times did, and say neuroscientists can now accurately predict up to 10 seconds in advance? No, of course not. 60% isn't accurate. That's 10% greater than chance. They're based on notions of consciousness and subconsciousness. One of the greatest embarrassments for modern science is we don't know where the conscious mind is. They can't find it. They can't explain it. It's functionally integrated across so many different brain regions. If we're going to say, no, we don't have free will because we never make conscious decisions, I mean, show me where the conscious mind is. Show me where the conscious self is. On the global workspace model of consciousness, our subconscious and conscious minds are very closely tied. And I guess I would just ask Dr. Tyson if he's going to make claims that, well, no, we make our decisions unconsciously, that our unconscious mind informs the conscious mind. Show me where that line is. Show me where consciousness is. Again, I could go on and on about the science. We look at brain damage studies. Those are abnormal cases. Abnormal cases, people that have brain damage. Look, I'm not going to stand up here. We share a lot of the same views. I'm not going to say, well, there's some mystical mind or so. No, that doesn't need to be the case. If you want to believe that we have free will, you don't need to be religious. You don't have to have some notion of a mystical soul. You just need to be, we need a little more humility, that our current paradigm isn't infallible. There are things about the universe that we don't know. And we need to seriously look at what we're talking about when we talk about free will. That brings me to my second point. So first point, I hope I've convinced you that the science is a long ways off. And anyone that tries to convince you either now or even in the near future that we're going to have all the answers to unlocking the brain, don't buy it. I'm telling you right now, don't buy it. Second point, free will. Okay, this is where the philosophers come in. Who here knows much about philosophy? Who here cares much about philosophy? Who thinks what philosophers do are no? Okay, so I was a lawyer. I was practicing law, and I went back to do my PhD in philosophy. What do you think my colleagues would have said about that, Gavin? What the heck are you doing? Why would you do this? I will tell you right now, philosophers are important. The humanities, we both agreed, are important, that we need to think about things critically. I don't think we would disagree about these things. And philosophers have over 2,000 years. I mean, this isn't a new debate. This didn't just come up yesterday, free will determinism. It's gone back 2,000 years to the ancient Greeks who tried to make sense of how, if the world's made entirely of matter and swerving particles, how are we free? Follow it through even theological basis of fatalism. If God knows everything, if he's good, then how can we be free? This isn't a new argument. What you have is these scientific studies dressed up, these oversimplified views of what it means to be free, and now we're saying, we don't have free will. Okay, well, when we talk about freedom, what are we talking about? I won't dig into the philosophical details because actually it's funny, Gabriel was like, he sent out an email when we were discussing leading up, he's like, let's keep this accessible. We're talking about technical science, philosophy, and I think Dr. Tyson did a great job of doing that. So I'll skirt over the philosophy. It's going up on YouTube, so I might get some flack from my colleagues for it. Here's the thing. The nature of human freedom, what it means to be free, is very complicated. There's no consensus. People have thought about this for 2,000 years, and I would identify two schools of thought. We have what are called hard incompatibilists or determinists who say, no, we don't have free will, doesn't make sense, doesn't fit with the scientific view of the universe. There's compatibilists, which Dr. Tyson mentioned, doesn't really make sense. If determinism is true, intuitively, how could we be responsible? At first, those are easy arguments to dismiss. If anyone has the time or the inclination, I would encourage you to look at them more carefully because I think it was Dennett who said sometimes his students would come up to him after class and be like, well, what is this argument? This is ridiculous. And he's like, well, it's possible you've discovered something glaringly wrong that no one thought about, or maybe people that have been thinking about this for 2,000 years, you've discovered something they've missed, or maybe you should go back and read the argument a little more carefully. I think there are very strong compatibilist arguments and worth looking into. The one that I want to focus on today is libertarianism. That's the idea that builds on advancements in quantum physics. Now, we used to see this Newtonian picture of the universe as deterministic, cause and effect. When we get down to the quantum level, the subatomic level, things start to get a little weird. Particles have no definite temporal spatial location, and we've discussed leading up a little bit about the quantum phenomena. The thing is, the main point here is the fabric of the universe isn't determined. Everything isn't determined in advance. It's random, it's improbabilistic. As Dr. Tyson has rightly noted, does that give us freedom? It doesn't seem at first like it does. If our decisions are determined, it doesn't seem that we have free will. If our decisions are random, it doesn't seem to help us much. But there are some very compelling theories coming out in the literature called agent causal and event causal. I won't get into the details. The thing is, there's a lot about the universe we don't know. There's this randomness in the universe. We want to talk about reducing things to smaller and smaller parts. Is there some space in that universe, some flicker of freedom where as agents, as human beings, we have these rational capacities that allow us to make order out of this chaos on the universe, to bring meaning to our own lives? Is there something there? I don't know, and I don't plan to try and convince you of that today. What we need to realize is that our best scientific theories are not perfect. I mean, science is often seen as a graveyard littered with theories that we once believed to be true, but no longer believe. And I have faith in the paradigm, but there's one quote from a recent article that I just wanted to read here. And again, this is a scientist, so I fully expect to get shredded, but okay. So scientists take delight in and advance their careers by claiming to have disproven conventional wisdom, and so bashing free will is appealing. He goes on to talk a little bit about quantum physics. Different scientists discovered different kinds of causes. Philip Anderson, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, explained this beautifully several decades ago in a brief article titled "More is Difficult," or "More is Different." Physics may be the most fundamental of sciences, but as one moves up the ladder to chemistry, then biology, then physiology, then psychology, and onto economics and sociology, at each level, new kinds of causes enter the picture. The things that each science studies cannot fully reduce to lower levels, but they also cannot violate the lower levels. Our actions cannot break the laws of physics, but they can be influenced by things beyond gravity, friction, and electromagnetic charges. And he goes on. I think I'm running short on time here. But okay. He says, again, we cannot break the laws of physics. I think everyone would agree that human beings can't fly simply by flapping their wings. I'm not talking here about some mystical ability to break these chains of causation, to break the laws of physics, but again, we cannot break the laws of physics, but we can act in ways that add new causes that go far beyond physical causations. No electron understands the golden rule, and indeed an exhaustive study of any given atom will furnish no clue as to whether it is part of a person who is obeying or disobeying that rule. Sorry guys, try and get away from these as much as possible. But they cannot be reduced or fully explained by chemical reactions. So the point here is there's a lot that we don't know. Our best scientific theories, just because I'm suggesting that there may be some room for some sort of free will, with some humility to accept that there are things about the universe that we don't understand, that this doesn't necessarily fly in the face of quantum physics or everything about our natural laws and best scientific theories. My argument is that we can't rule it out yet. Yeah, the door's open, that there may be something, some sort of freedom that brings meaning to our lives. And that brings me to my final point. So I've looked at the science, I've shown that we shouldn't buy into this stuff. I've looked at free will, I'm saying that we're really oversimplifying a hard question here, it's not a new question. The final point is, why does free will matter? Now, Dr. Tyson said, not a big deal. If we don't have free will, maybe we're going to be upset for a little bit, sit around, just get up and make ourselves a sandwich. I don't believe that, and I don't think that you should either. So I'm going to use an example here. I'll use Dr. Bailey and Dr. Tyson. So, and at every single point, I'm going to ask for feedback. So let's say that Dr. Bailey picked up a gun and shot Dr. Tyson right now on the stage. Who would say that she was responsible for that? Okay, now let's take this a step further. Let's say that an evil neuroscientist implanted a chip in her brain, radio control, presses the button, it forces her to pick up the gun and shoot him. Who would think that she was responsible? Okay, let's take this a step further, one more. Let's say that she's been influenced since birth by neurochemists so that the only course of action open to her, given her particular disposition, desires, beliefs, reasons, is that she would pick up a gun and kill Dr. Tyson. Who would find her responsible? You think so? Okay. For the people that said we wouldn't hold her responsible, why? Why wouldn't we hold her responsible if she had a chip in her brain and shot Dr. Tyson? Anybody? Yeah, it wasn't up to her. She didn't have control, right? So are we going to say what you did, Dr. Bailey, was wrong, what you did is bad, you shouldn't have done that? Why not? Because she couldn't have done otherwise. She didn't have any choices. So what Dr. Tyson wants to say is, well, no, it doesn't really matter. I think it does. Let's take another example. My 3 children are here today. Let's say that one day, I would never do this, by the way, one day I just decided to stop taking care of them, stop feeding them, stop clothing them. Who thinks that I have an obligation to do that I should do that? Right? Yeah, I tend to agree. So let's say this tree over here, does that tree have an obligation to feed and clothe my children? Why not? Because it can't. So would we accept that ought implies can in this case, that if you ought to do something, you should have the ability to do it? Does that make sense? So if determinism is true, how is it any different in the case of Dr. Bailey, who has a computer chip in her brain? If we can't do otherwise, is there any difference between her killing Dr. Tyson because she has a computer chip in her brain, or her killing him because she's determined to do so? Is there any difference there? So we want to blame her because what she did was wrong, but if determinism is true, can we blame her? No, we can't. That's a big deal. We can't blame her. Sure, we could lock her up and put her away and say what you did was dangerous, but these basic instincts of blame, the Boston bomber, is what he did wrong? It was wrong. If we lose free will, that goes out the window. Obligation. I stopped feeding my children. Can we say that's something you ought to do? Moral obligation, is that something you morally ought to do? If you don't have the power to do it, can we really look at someone and say you ought to do that? This is a big deal. Free will is a big deal. And to say, oh, well, you're just going to keep on going, sure, you might be like, well, I can never break away from these things. But if you care about the truth, if you care about these things, then you can't, with integrity, move forward, and things should change in your life. At least if you're thinking critically and looking at the way the universe really is. Now, I've shown you problems with the science. I've shown you that the complexities surrounding free will are much greater than we would initially suppose based on our intuitions. And I've shown you that it matters. And to use some courtroom terminology, he went first with his resolution. In criminal trials, you talk about proof beyond a reasonable doubt because the stakes are so high, you do not want to get it wrong. And in this case, I would say if there's people here today that believe you have free will, that you direct your lives in meaningful manners, I don't think that we've met the burden of proof to show that at this point where the doors open for some sort of agent causation, it's not his fault, by the way, it's doors open for some sort of agent causation, that our best scientific theories are falling short, and that the stakes are so high that I cannot accept today that we should go away believing that we don't have free will, and I don't think that you should either. And I would welcome Dr. Tyson's feedback. I hope I haven't misrepresented any of his views in any way, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
And Dr. Tyson has a 5-minute rebuttal.
Okay. I totally agree that the media reporting on science has been abysmal. You always hear about a gene for this and a gene for that. That is inherently incorrect. What it might be is that a gene is associated with a certain behavior, which is a very different thing. So scientific reporting has been one of the banes of my existence. It always, part of it is because newsrooms are so underfunded these days that they can't afford a real scientific journalism, and it's basically somebody else's job. The low person on the totem pole has to go out and read a press release from a scientist, and they just uncritically use that. I agree, it's totally terrible. However, what was characterized in the Soon, my worthy opponent has characterized the Soon report, rather glibly dismisses Soon's results. They were statistically significant. You cannot ignore that they could predict which arm was raised, just because it was actually 20% greater the chance. Doesn't mean that you can dismiss it. It's not perfect. MRI is not a perfect technique. I'm an MRI expert, and I can tell you it is a very difficult technique to use. And if you get the slice placed wrong or something like that, you will miss that part of the brain which is actually being activated. And you're only trying to get, for instance, a very small region of the, and you don't always exactly know where it is, so you're not always going to get it perfectly. The fact that we do not know everything in the universe isn't a reason to accept free will. It's an argument from ignorance, and really, we've had 2,000 years of philosophy, yes, but we've had 2,000 years of introspection. And I've already showed you that introspection cannot be used to actually gain understanding of the underpinnings of how the mind works. And we can only draw conclusions based on the best available information we have at the time. All of our conclusions are not final. No scientific conclusion is ever final. It is always provisional. Some new information can come along. All I can do is say, right now, the evidence is pointing very strongly towards there not being any free will. I'd like to correct something also about what I said about the implications of free will. I didn't say that the implications of free will were, there's no implications at all. I said the implications for society were profound. For you and me, not so much. I really don't think so. My life didn't change from before I was a hard determinist to after. Nothing. I can't think of point to a single thing that changed in my life. Now I know that's a bit of a N of 1. It's not a statistically significant result, but all I can tell you is about my own experience. And in terms of the philosophy, I want to see more than just philosophy. I want to see evidence. I want to see empirical, objective evidence. Anything else is talk. If it has nothing to do with empirical evidence, it's talk. Quantum effects. Yeah, a lot of people talk about quantum effects and free will. I reject it categorically because quantum mechanics, quantum mechanical effects cannot be seen at the level of a neuron, let alone at the level of a brain. It's just too large an object. You would never be able to measure them. I think we can safely remove that from the equation. And I heard mention of randomness in the universe. Yes, there's randomness, but that doesn't help free will. Can you randomly make a decision? It'd be like flipping a coin every second of your life. And how can that be a basis for saying that your decisions are free will? And the moral implications. I already made mention that our ability to project what future consequences are for particular actions is what differentiates us from that tree. If I shot Dr. Bailey, sorry, Terry, you're getting shot a lot. Oh, that's right, you shot me, so I'm just shooting you back. Okay, good. This is retribution. If I shot you and I had a chip in my brain, somebody else was controlling it. Of course, I would not be morally responsible. I had no way of actually considering future consequences. I just pulled out a gun and shot her. The person controlling that chip, of course, different story, unless of course they have a chip too, and then it goes regressing, and not going to go there. But this is what gives us a grounds for moral responsibility. The ability to predict future consequences of your actions. This is why we don't blame bears for killing people. A bear is just being a bear. And it's usually because people are being stupid. So I think that's pretty much my rebuttal to the points that were made by my worthy opponent. And I'd like to actually, you know what, I was remiss. I should have thanked everybody too. What a gracious fellow speaker. Yes, what's wrong with me? I couldn't have done otherwise, apparently. Yes, sure. I'd like to thank everybody for being here. It's an interesting discussion. Jared and I had a really long conversation on Friday on this. It was like 3 hours or something, and we were getting into all the nuances of, you know, I'm not a philosopher, obviously, but I do like to think about these things. And I think everybody should think about these things because they actually do matter in terms of society. Absolutely. Our criminal justice system is totally dependent. It hinges, in fact, on this topic. Our rehabilitation of criminals is very much dependent on that. We're seeing, we both agree that right now things are going the wrong way in that area. So this is a very important topic, and thank you for coming out today. And I'd like to thank Dr. Bailey for arranging this. I know there was a, was it? Oh, okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Oh yeah, is that okay?
Absolutely.
Is it 5 and 5? Is it? Okay. Again, want to thank Dr. Tyson. He says he's not a philosopher. I had a conversation with him for 4 hours. He is. He just doesn't know it yet. We'll bring him around to the dark side. Okay. Yeah. Again, podcast is great. I would tune in. I'm not just trying to be condescending. I would tune in. It's great. Back to the student study. We're just quibbling now. I pulled it up on my smartphone, which is kind of a douche move when someone's responding, but it is 60%. Here's the thing. Compatibilism, we'll dig into the philosophy again here. Compatibilism, by very definition, is the view that if determinism is true, then you still keep some free will. And if he wants to say that you keep some sort of moral obligation, then he's crossing over to the realm where he's not even technically a determinist anymore. That's compatibilism. And I understand human beings have this capacity to see the consequences of their actions. Their ability to see that would also be determinant. And I won't get into the finer distinctions, the philosophical distinctions. My main point here today isn't convince you to have free will to spew off a bunch of philosophy. It's that we don't have the science there yet, that these aren't new arguments, that they're hard questions, and that we need to think about them critically. In that respect, I share all of Dr. Tyson's views. Let's think critically as citizens. Let's ask hard questions, not just about things political, things philosophical, about the meaning of life, about the purpose of things. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today and for the sponsors of Speaker's Corner. And thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.
Well, thank you both. This is the time where we open up the mic for questions and comments, so you're all invited to intervene. You can just line up over there and we'll recognize you one by one. This is also the time where we take the opportunity to thank the speakers for making themselves available. They take of their time. Takes time to prepare to be here. They kind of put themselves out to public scrutiny. So we'd like to thank you both. We have a practice of giving both speakers a certificate of appreciation. And we say to each of you, Dr. Tyson and Craig, Jared, that we present the certificate of appreciation to both of you for dedicating time and effort by speaking at Speaker's Corner. And thanks to your contribution of ideas and energy, we're better able to inform, enlighten, and entertain a more vibrant Calgary. Thank you very much, both of you. All right, now for interventions. Sir? Aaron.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, not to sound redundant, but I want to talk about Dr. Daniel Dennett's chip experiment and OCD. So let's say there's a nefarious neuroscience that comes to a guy named Fred. Fred has OCD, puts a chip in because they actually do have chips to help control OCD. But besides the OCD, the nefarious neuroscience scientist says, we're also controlling what you do. So as a result, he becomes amoral. Fred ends up in court and says, well, judge, it wasn't under my control because I had this chip. And so then the neuroscience gets up and says, yeah, but I was messing with him. It was a joke. So what she did non-surgically, what she did surgically and what she did non-surgically is a very dangerous, non-surgically what she did was very, very dangerous. And so when we see the neuroscientists going around today saying, well, we have no free will, is that not analogous to the girl that was on, the neuroscientist that was on the stand saying, well, I was just messing with him. So I think the implications of saying we have no free will are something that we really need to think of. As somebody who's an activist, if I go to jail for breaking the law, it's because I believe sometimes you have to go to jail for justice. And I would prefer to go to jail for about a month, 5 months, a year even, rather than being chemically castrated because I had some neuroscientists say, well, he had oppositional defiance disorder and he could not do anything else. Last but not least, I think we need to ask ourselves whether the last 2,000 years we were looking at the wrong place. We were looking at physical phenomena for the last 2,000 years, and maybe we should have been looking at biological phenomena and our ability to avoid. And our ability of avoidance has gotten better over the billions of years that evolution has been on the earth, and our ability to build competency. So I think that's a big question that we need to ask. And again, I want to restate the consequences of believing we have no free will from the perspective of the justice system, I think are grave and serious. And I don't want to have GlaxoSmithKline putting a chemical into my brain because I have a moral, ethical viewpoint that the tar sands is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I've got to say that this is the third season of Speaker's Corner, and this is by far the most cerebral of the sessions we've had. I think you wanted to make an intervention. Please step forward.
Okay, my name is Denise Brown and I'm an anthropologist, and so I have a couple of comments. I'm coming from a different, I would have tackled this a little bit differently, and I think my position on free will is kind of in the middle. that area that neither of you agree with. So that's probably a good thing. Let me start off with, I'm not a biological or a hard scientist at all, but I did go to a talk. We had a visitor in town last week, Dr. Joe Lamb from Guelph University, and he's one of probably Canada's leading expert on bacteria. And so I learned everything that I know today about bacteria at his talk. And he was pointing out, showing, and demonstrating with his research results something about biofilms and microbiomes. And what they're discovering, the people that look at bacteria, is that the bacteria actually have a community, they call it a community, and that they communicate with each other. And this is not like bacteria. This is a community of unlike bacteria that communicate with each other and tell each other where there are food sources and where there are threats, and they develop a microfilm, which is a collaborative activity among bacteria of different sorts to work against threats like antibiotics. Okay, so these are bacteria. He told me that our body is made up of 10% human cells and 90% bacteria cells. Anyway, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm interested in the human cells, and I think it's really interesting that we're not talking about humans in the human community and the human biome, and the fact that if bacteria communicate a little bit, humans communicate a lot and form cultural contexts in which our free will is contextualized. So how can we talk about ethical decisions and morals and laws and regulations and courts and jails without talking about cultural context in which we grow up and we are acculturated? So I just think it was rather strange that in that list of disciplines that one of the speakers talked about, starting with the quantum physics and running right through, and he wound up with sociology. And I'm like, why is anthropology not in that list? When what we're really talking about, when we talk about free will, we have to talk about how our ability to understand things and do things and decide about things is so within the context of our cultural frameworks.
Thank you very much. Okay, Vincent, you had something to say? If anyone else has a comment they'd like to make, if you'd please come stand over here on the left by the speaker, we'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
Actual question.
Okay, we have an actual question.
If someone is being tortured and they're given the option of freedom or not freedom from a like a, how to word it? No, sort of like if you're given a choice, coercion or something like that, is that free will or is that not free will? Both of them, yeah. It's just like...
Okay, if you're being tortured, that's a little different. Okay, so if you're being tortured to make a decision, okay, that's coercion. Yeah, that's not free will, obviously. But we'll let them answer that one. So he said if you're being tortured...
Well, you can't commit a crime under duress. It's actually a defense, I believe, is it not? Duress, yeah. So, yeah. So that's kind of made it problematic already. He's a lawyer. No, here, you take this. Oh, that's true. Yeah, but is it not? Yeah, my understanding is duress is actually something. It's kind of a defense. It is narrow, yeah, but it can be, yeah. If you had no other option and you were under duress, I don't think you could be held legally culpable. No.
Thank you. Janet, you have something to add, and that's good. You know, Gabor was going to call on you if you didn't get up.
Well, I am a philosopher, and I've been teaching philosophy for over 50 years. Well, about 50 years, actually, getting on for 50 years. And I thought I should say something about the fact this was very much set up as a debate. You know, one side, the other side. And I don't really think that this is what philosophy is about, dumping on one side or the other side. The point of what I used to say to students is that the person who does best in my class is the one who convinces me that I'm wrong. This went down very well with Alberta students who apparently used to being told in school that they mustn't disagree with the teacher. And the reason why I'm making this point is that I think our attitudes to people who do wrong or right, praise and blame, are very socially important. And if we haven't thought through what are good reasons for praise and blame, then that's going to have important social consequences that we might not like. And I think that it's very important to examine the conceptions of how people act and their relationship to the conditions under which they act. And certain versions of free will, I think, are very simple-minded. That, you know, you're free to do anything, but then how do we explain your reaction to reasons? How do reasons explain what you act? Right? If we don't have a connection between them, if we're cut off from them. And then if you say, well, everything's caused, you kind of remove from people the suggestion that we've got to go and examine the world and the different kinds of ideas we might encounter. I mean, I've always liked looking at the world and seeing when I might change my mind. And in this tradition, which is, I would say, it's pretty much an academic skeptic tradition, you can't make up your mind until you've examined all the reasons on both sides and their strength. And what you will usually find, and David Hume echoes this, is you'll probably find that you can't decide for certain. So you're going for one side or the other is going to be somehow like tossing a coin almost, but it's a well-informed guess at what is right, and you can also analyse whether it's informed by your emotions or your reason or just your ignorance. And I mean, this is not an attitude. By the way, you kept talking about 2,000 years. I don't know where that came from, because it's 3,000 years that philosophy started developing in northern India, spread into Asia Minor, and then... No, I mean, that started 2,800 BC, which is a lot more than 2,000 years. And determinism in the Greek world was not very important. I mean, when Aristotle's talking about when are we free, he's interested in what are the conditions under which you're prepared to say that you'd hold somebody to blame for what they did. And, you know, if somebody takes my hand and stabs it, I'm not free. And that's fairly obvious. If I freely choose to do something, then it seems that I am free. But Aristotle doesn't ask for a background story in the way that modernists have done. Really, since science came to be seen as mechanistic, that's when the determinism story takes hold, because we're going to say, oh, it's all you know, works according to a machine, and that's why quantum theory's been undermining it, because it's not mechanistic in the appropriate way. Anyway, sorry, I just thought I'd offer a few comments on the different way of looking at things.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else have anything they'd like to say on the topic of free will? Any questions they'd like to ask our speakers? Gabor.
There was a bit of a legal debate developing here in the, while no one was listening, namely that duress is a defense to a criminal charge. And so Jared says that it is. And so I have to ask you the question, if I point a gun at Randy's head and say, you shoot Jared, or I'm going to shoot you, and he shoots you, as you appreciate the law, is that a defense? Would that exonerate Randy? So I put a gun to his head and say, you shoot Jared, or I'm going to shoot you. He shoots you. On these facts, is he to be found not guilty? Under Canadian law as it presently exists.
if you're asking me for legal advice, I can't provide it to you unless we have a formal retainer in place. Are you thinking about carrying?
I was afraid you'd end up asking for money, because I too am a lawyer and I operate by the same ethic.
He's also a graduate.
Anyone else? Questions, comments? Rants, raves, nothing? Well, listen, thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate you coming out. If you want to know about subsequent events and debates, you can join our meetup group, and you'll always be notified of what's coming. There's no charge, no obligation, and no one will ever call you. By the same token, you people have heard me imprecate before. We're always looking for topics and speakers. If you think of any topic that you'd like to have debated, please approach us. And once again, thank you for coming.
And I'll just add that next week our debate is on ridiculing religion and the religious practices of others should be illegal. So we have two very fascinating speakers for that one, and we know this is an emotional topic, so the heat will probably fly next week. So we encourage everyone to come down. And also, if you would like some written information on where to go to look up Speaker's Corner on our Meetup site or our Facebook page, I have that. If you'd like a copy of it, just come on up to the stage and we'll get at it. And right now we're just going to put on a few tunes. Thank you everyone for coming down, and we hope to see you next week.